What is up, my peeps? Joshua Smith here at GSD Studios. First off, thank you so much for checking out today's content. I'll make this extremely fast, but I need to plug our sponsors that make this show possible. Our first sponsor is PerfectStormNow.com, by far the most effective and affordable real estate agent website and database platform in the industry. It is the system I use to sell 50 plus homes every single month. Check it out at www.perfectstormnow.com. Our second sponsor is my personal 90-day mastery bootcamp, which is, again, my personal real estate agent mentorship program where we spend 90 days together, 12 live sessions. You get daily access to me inside the program. You guys, we go so extremely in-depth. There's nothing that's incomplete about this program. You're going to get all the tools that you need to go out there and crush it inside your real estate business. Make sure to go check us out, www.90daymastery.com. You can watch in-depth videos of exactly what's covered to see if the program is for you. See all the raving testimonials we have from all of the amazing agents and clients that went through the program. So make sure to check us out, www.90daymastery.com. All right, you guys, let's jump on into today's content. What is up, my peeps? Joshua Smith here with another GSD Mode interview, where every single week we interview top entrepreneurs and just straight up top badasses that are out there choosing to create an epic, amazing life for themselves and their families, as well as have an impact on others and not choosing the path of mediocrity. So today, you guys, we got an amazing guest on the show. So when it comes to GSD Mode, getting shit done, like this dude is exactly that, right? Like he's when I think of GSD Mode or an entrepreneur that really fits what this podcast is all about, I mean, this dude is it, right? So he came to the U.S., migrated to the U.S. in 1997. From there, started creating a lot of success in the banking world, and the corporate world, created success there, but decided to leave the banking world. Even though he was creating all that success and had all of this, decided to give that up, leave, go out there, create his own companies. So today he owns 3 companies doing over a combined $50 million a year in gross revenue, plus has authored 9+ books. And again, just doing epic, amazing things. So really stoked and honored to have Pejman Ghadimi on the show. Welcome to the show, my friend.
Hey, thanks for having me, buddy.
Yeah, no, I'm excited, man. We were kind of talking about some things before we got started here and hit the record button that really got me fired up to just pick your brain on, dude. So I'm really excited to kind of jump into what you're doing today, because you've got a different, unique perspective than most entrepreneurs have, which has allowed you to continue to create so much success. But before we get into that, man, because I know you've got a pretty, crazy story, if you will, that led you to where you're at now. You know, a lot of people blame, I didn't go to the right schools, I didn't know the right people, I didn't, you grew up being raised by a single mother, you migrated to the U.S. I mean, you created this from scratch, right? So if we could just rewind the clocks, man, give us kind of a background story on literally like what led you into this entrepreneurship journey that you're on today.
Well, what's funny is actually you talk about circumstance and people complaining about, not having this or that. Well, I think I'm the perfect example of not having shit, right? Like, nothing. To the point where, when I was a refugee in France from the Iranian Revolution, my mom used to steal my Christmas gifts. She used to steal Nutella so I could have something of pleasure rather than just having normal food from time to time. And there were times where I had to watch my mom not eat in order for me to eat, so we went from that to then taking a shot at the U.S. And the U.S. was a disaster when we came here. My mom lost whatever little money she had saved during our time in France. And again, we're starting over. And a woman that once was head of an entire country's Department of Defense type system, is now a cashier in a literally bakery, in Washington, D.C. And I'm sitting there like something's got to happen, right? Like there's no way for this woman to struggle her entire life that she's going to be able to ever get me to a place where I can have the lifestyle I want, or I believe we can have, collectively, just between me and my mom. And so it came the time at a very young age to work, and then came yet another obstacle that I wasn't even legal, so I couldn't even work if I wanted to, I was the guy begging McDonald's for a job. Like, imagine that. Like, I go to McDonald's and I'm like, will you let me sweep the floors? I just want $3 an hour. And they're like, I can't even do that legally. So even that was a hard thing. And then it came the opportunity to find a very quick job as a telemarketer very early on. And at 14, I started telemarketing. And I was illegally telemarketing, but I was telemarketing. And it was one of these places where I said, you know what, I hate the work, but what choice do I have? I got to get good at it, because if I don't, they're going to fire me. And then I can't even sweep floors at McDonald's. So reality came, struck in that I had to just get really good at what I do. And that was, I think, the most important lesson in my life from a very young age that I learned, is that life isn't about what you do. It's more about how well you do it. And so I embraced this very, very early, that even if I was a telemarketer, even if I had a choice or not, as long as I was in that room that day, I was going to be the best at what I could do. And so with my limited English skills and everything else, I still learned to sell windows, siding, and roofing. So I took myself from $12 an hour to $2,500 a week by the age of 15 in commissions, selling roofing and siding, when everybody else in the office got fired, moved on, found a better job, and continued their life. And that allowed me to get promoted over and over and over, to the point where I'm 18 years old and I'm manager of a bank, which is unheard of, with no degree, nothing else. And by that point, I'm legal. So after I get my papers and I'm able to actually find the real normal work, not just an office working for a remodeling company, I started looking into my options, right? Things get better. So I have some money saved up. I'm not poor. I can afford my suits now. And I start going to work at a bank. And again, same strategy. It's not about what you do. It's how well you do it. It doesn't matter how much you like it, as long as you get good at it. And I worked myself up from 18 to 23 to an executive vice president position, and then find myself on the street by 25 because I'm an arrogant prick. So, I figured out that by 25, I had all the money, all the cars, all the success, and somehow, somewhere I lost my way, right? I became very arrogant, and I became very like, I'm the best at everything. Well, given that I really was the best at everything, I'm not going to take that away from me. But apparently, not everybody agreed. When you have people that are above you, that are 3 times your age and don't make as much as you, and they're looking at you as like a person who's not appreciative of what you have because you're so confident, they look at it as cockiness, and eventually you have a conflict of interest between you two, and you decide that maybe I should take my life elsewhere, So, but realistically, I didn't go into business till I was I was 14 when I started my first business, a car wash. I didn't take it seriously. Of course, that was nothing more than, nothing different than a lemonade stand for some people. But for me, that car wash became a $200K a year business in its third year before I was 17. And that had nothing to do with me. I had some immigrant friends that were working on that car wash with me. And they needed the work more than me. So I just facilitated an opportunity for them to do it in the same place where I was telemarketing. But the reason I bring that up is because that business then evolved after I got fired from banking into what today is a $40 million company known as VIP Motoring. So, as it's evolved to different stages and everything else, that very simple car wash that started when I was 14, true, that by itself is a very long story we can get into, but it ended up becoming a very large concierge service. And since then, I've leveraged a lot of the money that concierge service has made, in the financial background I had, to tap into a lot of other industries and other businesses together. Everything from a very powerful consulting agencies that works with banks and Fortune 500 companies, not to consult on sales or marketing, but to help them with culture, integration when they do merger and acquisitions, and creating service models. And then also having a very large credit repair agency that is out of New York, and then following through a lot of online properties, which you may have heard of, like Secret Entourage, Exotic Car Hacks, Watch Conspiracy, and the list goes on and on, right? So between all these businesses and continuously being able to tap into new verticals, I just take a very unique approach to business every time, allowing me to launch businesses without ever being involved and without doing any of the work, but consistently bringing them up to the 7-figure line very quickly.
Yeah, love it, man. Powerful stuff, dude. So when you got fired, man, because at that point, like you said, you built up some arrogance or just a ton of internal confidence. We're on top of the world. From there, when you got fired, because that sounds like that was the point where you just went full force into entrepreneurship. Now, when you got fired, were you like, boom, okay, screw it, screw this, I got to be in more control of my fate, I'm gonna go in entrepreneurship? Or was it like a little bit of a journey of trying to get other jobs, and then all of a sudden those dots kind of reconnected that entrepreneurship was for you?
Actually, I didn't consider myself an entrepreneur until years after that. I consider myself a business owner at that point, because I owned the business and it was time to step it up in business. But I differentiated the two. To me, entrepreneurship is about innovation and advancement. Business is about the mechanics of making money, and understanding how a business works means creating revenue. But for me, when it's funny you said that, because when I got fired, I spent maybe 2 weeks kind of mourning and being like, man, like I just lost, like no other bank's ever going to hire a kid and put him at that level, at that age without a master's and this and that. And maybe I got lucky, maybe I worked hard, but it ain't going to happen again. Like it's just, there's no way I can get back in the groove and just continue my work elsewhere. And what I realized quickly is that what that bank had done by firing me, I used to blame them. I was like, oh, they fired me. They took away my purpose, right? My purpose was to be a banker. I was really good at it. It was to lead people and do all of this stuff. And they took it away from me. So I used to blame them. I was like, how dare them after I've spent so much time, working for them and really building their company up and everything else. And then something, really interesting struck me, right? Like I was sitting there, I was sitting at a little Mexican restaurant because I didn't know what to do with myself. I was very hurt. And I used to go to this Mexican restaurant and I was well off. Don't get me wrong. I had a lot of money, meaning I had made money. I wasn't poor. And a lot of people think when you go get fired, you're typically poor, like you lose your income. But for me, it was different. I had made good real estate deals. I was making $250,000 a year. I had saved plenty of money. The question wasn't what would I do for money next, because I wasn't worried about money. What I was worried about is that how someone took away the only thing I loved doing. And so when I was sitting there at that restaurant, what struck me when I looked out, and I know this is going to sound weird, but I had a Lamborghini that was silver. I used to look at it and I was like, did they fire me? Did they take away my purpose? Or did I lose my purpose along the way at some point? And that really struck me because what I realized that day changed the way I looked at everything in life. What I realized was that I never worked for a bank. I never worked for a telemarketing company. I never worked for anybody but myself. And that was the kind of life-changing moment that allowed me to kind of seek a greater understanding above and beyond money. Because what I realized that day was that while I did go to work for a bank, and while I did work in a financial institution, at the end of the day, was I really working for somebody, or was I building my own life and leveraging the bank to do it? Like, was I working for free? Of course not. We all work for money, right? So when I was going to work, what I was really doing was crafting my own life and allowing the bank to be a part of that. And I was, for the longest time, looking at it the opposite way, that I worked for a bank, instead of looking at it as no matter what we do in life, we're doing it because we have a vision of our own life. And we're using these things, regardless that it's a job or a company or business, whatever we want to do. Those are just facilitations. They're just vehicles that allow us to transition to the vision of our own life. And so one of the things I did that day, and this was like a couple of weeks after I got canned, was I looked at life and I said, am I confusing the vision of my work with the vision of my life? Meaning, am I focusing so much on the vision of what I want my work to be that I'm really ignoring the vision that I've always had for my life? And instead, perhaps I should start looking for new vehicles to continue that vision onward, because I didn't lose anything when they fired me. All I lost was one vehicle to continue that vision forward. But all the experience, all the skills, all the things I've learned through the time, and all the money I've accumulated, that by itself can help me create another vehicle. So I understood that, like, perhaps finding vehicles that others control and hopping on for a ride, such as a job, regardless of how high it is or not, will always be just that, in the position of someone else's hands on the steering wheel, of that vehicle. And so I decided at that point that I was going to spend, regardless of what I did, it didn't matter that it was for money, for purpose, for whatever I wanted to follow on, that it would no longer be in the hands of someone else. And so I started, that's when I went back and I took my same car wash company, and started focusing on how can that become a bigger company than just washing and detailing cars.
Yep. I love that, man. That's such because a lot of people, man, I think sometimes that when people try to go on this journey to find their purpose and find their why, it creates so much internal suffering. It almost creates more internal suffering than maybe it doesn't, because, they're looking at it from the wrong lens, which you were as well. And then you just, that shift, just one little shift in that lens man, it's just so powerful what it can do to you. So, all right, dude. So then you jump back into your car wash business that you've kind of kept kind of as a side hustle, if you will, while you were doing this other stuff. What do you do there? Like, what are the differences? And I don't know what that revenue was at that point. You talked about $200,000 a year or whatever in revenue. So, like, what were some of those things that you did once you got involved and gave that your energy and focus? That because I mean, you took this from making a couple $100,000 to now being a $40+ million company. So like,
well, it was a different company though, just to be fair. You know, at the time it was nothing more than washing cars and detailing cars, you know, which only by itself has a capacity. I've always wanted to be around cars. I've always loved cars. At that time I drove nice cars, you know, and at the time I started that car wash thing, I didn't even own a car. By the time I actually was getting back into it, I owned 2 exotic cars, you know, so like it was a very different look for me into being in the car industry somehow. I didn't want to sell cars. I didn't want to be in a business of, you know, like selling cars and a car salesman on any level, regardless that I owned the dealership or not. So I decided, since I have some money, why don't I go into tuning cars instead of actually like focusing on washing and detailing? Why don't we offer parts and service and start working on exotic cars? Because in the DC area, there weren't a lot of people doing that at the time. And exotics weren't as mainstream as they are today in some of these cities. So it was very like niche, you know, and I started building kind of this following that already had a bunch of friends that were also Lamborghini Ferrari owners. And I was like, hey, I'm going to do the work in my shop now. So I'll save you some money on service and everything else come true. And I started building a following of people who really wanted kind of services around exotic cars. And that led me to getting a lot of interest from dealerships saying, well, can we use some of our side work that we don't have time to work, and we'll just build a customer, you'll do the work, we'll supervise it afterwards, and we're good to go. And I said, sure. And that built a new relationship to start being able to sell like parts, like wheels and tires, to dealerships. So it opened a new vertical of revenue again. So going from, you know, car washes that were $100 to now custom tune jobs that were like anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000 orders, to then following through now to also offering parts sales to dealerships who are doing volume way above what I could do at any time. And then allowing me to really look at my new client base and saying, okay, I have all these clients now. What do they want? Well, the same clients wanted, you know, more parts. They wanted stuff to put on their cars, and they wanted to trade their cars in. So then facilitating car deals and brokering and everything started becoming yet one more revenue channel. And all of this stuff was great. And we were roughly a $6-7 million company, you know, and doing fantastic. And I was very happy. And I had finally recuperated my revenue, like personally, you know, and my life was back in order. And then guess what happens? This gloomy thing happens called a recession. Yeah. You know, everybody's like, wait a minute, what is this? Like, what are you talking about? Like, what do you mean people aren't buying cars anymore? What do you mean exotic car dealers aren't offering 120% financing anymore and not able to sell wheels for 20 grand to people? So the dynamics of the playing field changed, right? Like tremendously. And that was that was the biggest thing I've ever done in business, which was called adapting. I started really looking at where am I going wrong? Like obviously you're selling luxury goods to high-end people. The high-end people ain't buying them anymore. It's not that they don't have it, they're just not spending. So what are they buying? Like what are we selling? What else can we sell? And came the idea of acquiring assets that were distressed in that field for a fraction of the cost. Because you see, like it's like real estate. It's the same thing, no matter what business you're in. Real estate will never die. People will always need homes, right? People will always buy stuff. Doesn't matter. That doesn't change either. It's what they buy that changes, right? It's how they buy that changes. But the behavior doesn't actually, in itself, doesn't change. It's what happens or how it's actually executed that changes. And that's what I realized at that point, and I adapted to that model. So instead of buying the most expensive cars and giving them to the people with the biggest pockets, I found the best deals and opportunities to sell people. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yep.
Okay, all right, cool. The video froze for a second. So anyways, the big thing was that I was selling some of these distressed like cars and everything else now to people, and getting me significantly ahead with a whole new market now. People who didn't want cars just to drive them and enjoy them. People who wanted cars as an investment. They wanted to buy cars because they were cheap and sell them later, hold them as an asset, you know? So I started looking into this myself and understanding that, wow, there's a huge market for this. There's a huge market where there's an investment in exotic cars to be had. And I had relationships with dealerships. And that's when I turned my business, instead of being like a tuning shop and a repair shop, we became the first in 2000. It was actually 2007, where we became the first investment fund for exotic cars. I had a finance background and I knew that people in banking weren't investing in banks anymore. They weren't doing stock market investments because that was going to go super risky. They weren't investing in CDs in banks anymore because FDIC was crap and it was done. So I said, what do we do? Well, what does that client need? Well, it needs an investment vehicle. And what is my opportunity and my competitive advantage is I have a dealership kind of connection with some of these dealerships that are looking to dump these vehicles so they can survive. How can I connect the two? And so I created a fund to help people invest in exotic cars where we would collectively buy a ton of exotic cars. I would do all the maintenance, the routine holdups, all the insurance, everything. And I would hold everything under my own umbrella. And people would just simply invest in it. So imagine 3 people got together and said, I'll each give $100,000 and we'll buy a $600,000 car for $300,000. We're buying it 50% off, but we know it'll go back to $450 after the recession. So, we're putting this $300K in 3 people, but people need a medium to be able to make sure they don't screw each other, who holds the car, who damages the car if this happens. So I was that medium. So I became a facilitator of investments in exotic cars. And that pushed our revenue way up. It tripled the revenue within the first year. And then we started leveraging the idea of the same clientele. Well, what about other things we can sell them? How about timepieces? How about real estate? How about yachts? They got to be doing this everywhere. So we eventually converted this business from, just being kind of a free-for-all hustle of cars into a full-on concierge service with an investment side and an accounting department that helped people leverage taxes, do financial accounting, and then further follow through with luxury lifestyle. So I made myself into the person people went to when they said, I want a lifestyle. I just don't want it to cost me an arm and a leg. How do I do it? And so I became the full 360 approach to luxury lifestyle from a perspective of wealth rather than a perspective of creating liabilities.
Yep, that's awesome, man. Love it, dude. So when you're connecting these dots, right? Because it just sounds like you're you have this just amazing, brilliant ability to go out there and connect the dots. But there can be a lot of dots, right? How do you know what is the right way to go? Because there's probably a lot of different ways that you could have taken this. So when you're saying, okay, hey, we're going to go, I've got these 5 paths we could go. How do you identify the next path that you're going to go? Do you have a strategy that you follow to, hopefully make sure that, everything's a risk, but making sure that I guess it's as strategic of a risk as you possibly can when you're adding these new departments?
So, I think of it a little bit differently. I look at everything as forecasting, right? A lot of people ask me, they're like, how do you know what's going to happen? And it's not that you know what's going to happen. You kind of look at what's happening now and you forecast how times are changing. People don't really understand how, a lot of people ask me today, they're like, oh, I got the next social media idea. I'm going to be the next Facebook. And I'm like, oh yeah, why do you say that? They're like, I have a big following and people will want to be on a social network with me. And they don't even understand how Facebook got formed. They're like, they think Facebook was a social media play when Facebook was really a hardware play. All Facebook did was anticipate that everybody would have a smartphone in their pocket. So they became the most optimized social network, on a smartphone. So that's why they became adopted so quickly. What did Twitter do? It anticipated that people would text more than they call, and it became the largest social network for its own time. And then what did Instagram predict? It predicted that everybody would have a camera in their phone that would be HD, and they would want a way to share that rather than message each other. And the same thing happened with Snapchat, right? The idea was that everybody would have a video camera in there. So it's the same thing. It's forecasting the future of where consumer behavior is going and what is going to meet at that intersection, and then preparing for it. I forecasted that people would need an investment vehicle from one end, and I forecasted from another end that people would have a need to unload distressed asset, and I connected the two. It had nothing to do with a car industry. The vehicle became automotive, but it could have been anything else, right? People were doing this in real estate. They were doing this in other things. And then I just used what I call the recycle model. I talk about this a lot in my new book, Radius. What I talk about is the way I forecast the forefront of how to penetrate a market or how to look at it is really simple. In the Radius model, I teach people that if you want to go into a new business and you already have a business or your business is already doing something, you need to look at 2 very distinctive things. The power of recycling 2 things, your customers and your resources. What can your resources in your current business be used for, right? To actually go after a new audience without having a cost to you. If you have an IT department that's already being paid on payroll, right? what else can you add to their task that is not going to increase your payroll, but is going to increase your output? You know what I mean? Like, what can those people with their skills do in the future, like tomorrow or the next day? What can they start working on so that while you're paying them the same, your output increases significantly, into a new division, into a new business and everything else. And the other side of it is your recycled customers. What can your customers in your current venue be new customers for? Like, imagine if you have a business that has 20,000 customers total, and that you say, I'm going to launch a new business, but I know that out of those customers, these people already trust me and they already do business with me and they like doing business with me. If I launched a new business, they would most likely support it. Not all of them, because it's not going to appeal to everybody, but maybe 10% of that audience would follow you through it, right? Well, now you just have 2,000 new customers right at the start of a new business. You don't need funding anymore. You just funded yourself, right? Right off the top. And you also validated your idea instantly without having a single dollar of marketing spend. So the idea is any single vertical I look at, like when you asked me this earlier, it's incredible I can have so many businesses at once. And the thing is, I don't have so many businesses. I just have two verticals, resources and customers. And then I create business vehicles that fall into both. So if you have a vertical currently, if you have a business currently that is running and doing well, and you can recycle its resources and recycle its customers, then you're going to have a home run with a new vertical. Now, it doesn't mean that the vertical even has to be in any way associated with the business you have now. It could be a brand new company. It could be completely unrelated to anything the other company has to do, except for the fact that the resources can be leveraged again and the actual customer base can be recycled to some extent. Now, again, don't confuse that I'm saying create a new company that appeals to the same exact customer. I'm saying that a portion of your customers can then be recycled to be taken over.
Yep. No, it's amazing, man. So then, I before we hit the record button, I know you were talking about, cause I was like, how's your week going? You're like, it's kind of, it's going good, man. I'm just kind of chilling, hanging out, you're at this point now. I guess where I'm going at this is, you're detached from the day-to-day of your companies, right? So, and so many entrepreneurs get stuck or they just, I don't know if it's a trust issue or whatever it is, where they've got this great business, but at the same time, they kind of have, they create it where they have a job and they're not able to just inspect what they expect from afar and then work on that next project. And you've been able to do this at a brilliant level. You're like, man, I put CEOs in place and I want them to be so dialed in that they don't have to call me, right? It just operates. I create this machine that just operates. So how do you go? So you've built this amazing company now by adapting, and I love that you said adaptation. It's like Einstein defined intelligence not by IQ, but a man's ability to adapt and change. And you've done that. But then how do you go from there, from being able to put the right people in place and detach yourself from the day-to-day, so then that you can go out there and create that lifestyle you really want and work on those new projects?
Well, I think, first off, you kind of nailed it when you said people, ultimately are buying themselves a job, right? They're not building companies. And I think that's the biggest problem people have. Like, they look at business in a manner that's like, okay, how can I make money with this business? Not how can the business make money doing this? So that's the big differentiator there is people always become their business. And they ultimately, here's what happens. So when they become their business, they become the reason why their business makes money, right? So they're like, without me, this business wouldn't function the same because people don't know what I know. People won't do this, blah, blah, blah. But that's exactly why you didn't build a business. What you did is you pretty much became a hustler that knows how to make money doing what you do. But the reality is a business has to be able to stand on its own 2 feet. It has to be like a child. A child that grows up and only says, I can't do anything without my dad is not going to be a successful child, right? Like, it doesn't matter. It's going to be just a person that hides behind his dad his whole till he's 30 years old. The point is a business the same way has to learn how to stand on its 2 feet. Meaning it has to go through these trials and errors. It has to go through its bad customers as much as its good ones. And it has to go through something called a process. And business, here's the best part. Business is simple. Most people complicate it because they insert themselves in the middle of it. So business is really simple. It's just not easy. So that's the difference, right? Like, they confuse the two. They're like, oh, it's really complicated. No, it's not complicated. It's really simple. It's just not easy. It's not easy to let go. It's not easy to watch a customer fall in their ass and be like, oh, because what you're doing is you're afraid to lose your money. That's why you're not creating a process. You're afraid of losing money, so you won't hire people because you don't want to pay people. You're afraid to lose money, so you won't allow people that you've paid and you're hiring to take over what you're doing because you're afraid they'll do it worse or they'll steal from you, whatever it is. So you have all of these fears of losing money, which is the reason you're limiting your business's growth to the extent of how much money you can make within it. And as a result of that limitation in capacity, you never actually evolve. I mean, I talk about this again a lot in my book, where a person has to understand that there's 5 pillars to a business, to any business, doesn't matter, whatever it is. The first pillar is an idea, right? Everybody has an idea for a business or an idea for a product. The next definition, the next pillar is the idea of a product or service. Every business, regardless that is product-based, service-based, even if you're offering yourself as a consultant, it has still a product. You are perhaps the product or not. And as a result of it, that limitation happens at this stage very, very many of the times. So an idea evolves to a product. A product has to be allowed to evolve into an actual business. And a business has to evolve into a brand. And a brand has to evolve in an empire. So what differentiates at each time, if you are allowed to evolve or not, is your mastery of each pillar. Instead of just jumping forward, I'm sure you've heard this, you talk to a lot of people. I'm sure you hear a lot of people say, oh, I've launched a brand. And I'm like, how do you launch a brand? You don't launch a brand. That doesn't make any sense. A brand is built off of trust, consistency, and recognition by its audience. If a product is just launched in the marketplace, then how is it a brand? It's not. It's this delusion, right, that we are bigger than we are. When in reality, what you've launched is a product. You've taken your idea and you've launched a product. Now, the goal of the product is not to become a brand, it's to become a business. But you see, people are already talking about branding when they're talking about products. So instead of creating a process around how do I sell this product, how do I get my t-shirt in the hands of 10,000 people, the entrepreneur is more worried about how do I make sure that my messaging and my story is great and that people love what I stand for. But nobody cares what you stand for because nobody's buying your t-shirts, right? Nobody has your t-shirt. So who gives a shit what it stands for? Like, if you're like, oh, my t-shirt says self-made. Okay, but nobody knows who you are. Nobody's wearing your shit. So why would they care what that means, right? Like, that doesn't mean anything. You have a product. Your job is to get that product in the hands of 50,000 people. Sell 50,000 t-shirts and then come back and tell me while you were building that, you came up with a great story. But meanwhile, you did build a business out of it. You have a process of manufacturing. You have a process of selling. You have distributors. You have online sales. You have Shopify. You have a model in place, right? And you're leading that concept. This is why people don't evolve into these 5 pillars, because they're more focused on the further pillars of creating empires when they just have an idea, instead of focusing in working in the present while forecasting the future. We talked about this a second ago, and you say, how do you connect the dots? Well, if you understand these 5 pillars, then you can judge at which point of these pillars do you intersect with consumer behavior. And when you do, that edge where both connect, right, when they meet, that's the place where you can have a big win. That's the place you can forecast and say, this is when I go mass public. Meaning if you look at an Uber, right, it's the same thing. You look at, they're forecasting how people will make decisions, but they're also forecasting that people use their phones, right? So they're like, let's come up with an app, and they solve a problem where it takes, the problem they're solving with Uber is a problem of time, because they're making it easy for you to get a ride and they're making it fast. So that's what they're solving. They're not really solving the taxi issue, right? They're solving the timing issue of getting places, because now they're bringing people to you instantly. How long did it take to call a cab company? 30 minutes. By the time you got done and they told you when will the cab be there, you're like, hey, the guy's traveling from 20 miles away to come pick you up to take you 5 miles from your house. And you're like, is there no better, more efficient way to get someone to me, right? And that time that you lost, that 30 minutes, Uber solved that in about 2 minutes from your average time of getting picked up. So that's what people bought, right? They bought their time back. That's what they're paying for. They're not paying for a ride from a stranger. They're paying for the time they're saving. So ultimately, what people miss in a lot of the business concepts is that they don't look far enough ahead. And then if they do, they're focused on working there instead of working right here where they are today, and saying, listen, this is the simplest way to look at it. I own a t-shirt company. I sell a t-shirt. That's it. That's it. It's not fancier than this. It's not more crazy than this. You sell a t-shirt. Is it glamorous? Nope. Do you care? No. What's glamorous is when you learn how to sell 50,000 t-shirts.
Yeah.
Because then 50,000 people are going to be putting pictures of your t-shirts on Instagram, right? That's a lot more glamorous than talking about what your brand stands for when not a single person has ever worn your t-shirt.
Yep. No, I love that, man. Yeah, dude, it's and like you said, man, it's at the end of the day, none of this stuff is complicated, but that doesn't mean it's simple, right? It still takes massive hustle, massive amounts of focus.
Well, no, it's hard, but it is simple. It's hard, but it's simple. That's the thing. Like it's so easy to confuse the two. It's not complex. Like how many t-shirt companies have you seen out there? There's like 5,000, right? And there's another dozen that come out every week on Instagram.
Yeah.
By now, there's at least 100 t-shirt companies that have figured out how to successfully build a 7-figure t-shirt company. That means any single person out there that wants to start a t-shirt company can easily say, oh, let me look at X, Y, and Z company, and they built a big business. How did they do it? That's a simple process because you can literally watch it. You can watch it on Instagram. You can call the guy on Facebook and be like, hey, do you have 5 minutes for me to ask you a few questions? You can watch one of my Secret Entourage Academy episodes. You can learn how people have built specifically a t-shirt company. It's not complicated. There's a process to it. It's not easy to do because if it was, then 5,000 of them would be successful, but it's simple. And this is the part where people get confused. They want to make it complicated. They're like, listen, how do I get a competitive edge selling t-shirts? Bro, it's a t-shirt. There's no competitive edge. Like someone's going to wear it or they're not going to wear it, What you're thinking is your linear thinking is preventing you from understanding. What you need to innovate is not a t-shirt. It's how or why people wear a shirt. Either you innovate perhaps the automated service on how people purchase t-shirts. So the way you're bringing a t-shirt to life, your competitive advantage doesn't become the t-shirt. It becomes the delivery system. Like my Shopify store is 100 times better than everybody else's. That is a competitive advantage, right? But nobody's looking at that because that's where the business element is, right? They're not looking at that. What they're looking at is, oh, which color should I make my shirt so it stands out outside of the 2 billion t-shirts that are out there? Well, how many colors can you possibly have? Who cares, right? And if you look at any of the businesses that have disrupted an industry or that have come out and been major players in the game within the first 5 years, it's not because they've disrupted the space of what they do, is they've disrupted how well they do it, right? And they've disrupted it because they've taken a different angle to how they do it. So that's what people miss, right? Like they look at that and they complicate the item, the product, when the product is very simple and so is the delivery, right? So what happens though is it's in the thinking of how, that you can really create a lot of damage in a positive manner.
Yeah, love it, dude. So, all right, man. So you've got you build up this company. This company's doing absolutely epic, and you start building other companies. And as you've explained, I'm curious, man. Like, what led to you writing books? Because it's books can be time consuming to go out there and write, and it's not like you don't have a lot going on, or you didn't have a lot going on when you started authoring these books. Like, what led to you wanting to go out there and start getting into that, into that, I don't know, call it industry, but into that space?
So you're going to die laughing too. Here's the funny part too. I've never read a book in my life. But I hated reading. I never did well. I tried to read a book once. It was called Gatsby. I didn't do very well. I thought the movie was better, right? So, I just suck at reading. Like, I just don't like reading. I just didn't like reading books ever. But it goes to the exact same thing I just explained about the how. When I look back at my life and I had made enough money, like I was like, okay, I have enough money to be comfortable. I don't have, forgive me to say, I don't have fuck you money, but I have enough money to be happy. You know what I mean? I don't have a private plane, but I have enough to take a private plane anywhere I want, right? So it's a little bit of a different dynamic when you start reflecting on your life and you ask yourself, what do I want the next 10, 15 years of my life to look like? The same way I can do that for a business and envision its future. I told you early on, it's important to envision your own vision, right, of your life outside of the boundaries of what society has made you believe matters, which is just money. society's race for money is the way to keep score. It's fair, it's normal, it's a need. But money in the scope of life is nothing more than leverage. And so you come to a point where you have enough of it, where you tell yourself, okay, I'm paying people to run my companies, I'm paying people to facilitate my life and make it nicer. What else can I use money for? How else can I leverage myself? And then you start realizing that maybe it's not just about leveraging yourself through income or money, but perhaps there's larger, more powerful and meaningful leverage that called purpose. What do you want your life to be remembered for? What do you want to look back in 50 years when you're old and say, I did this in the world and this was my impact? And so came the time where it was a lot of self-analysis, where I analyzed all of these past businesses I had and all these things I did. What was the common denominator and how I did it? Why did I have this gift for doing this and other people didn't? Like, where was my competitive advantage? Personally, not in a business, not in an industry, but personally, what was it that made me do that? And I realized there was a common denominator in everything I did in my life, and that was always teaching. If I was in corporate America, my leadership style was teaching. I would teach my staff how to be the best at what they are, and I would create results through them, not personally. I wasn't the guy that was going and selling, but I could teach selling because I was good at it. So the point was, it was always through teaching. Even if it was small business ownership, it was about teaching my customers why investments in cars made sense. It was always about teaching my staff how to persuade people to do this. So it was always this teaching element to sitting there and coaching and teaching. And so I said, that's great. I've coached and taught maybe 3,000 people my entire life through all these businesses and all these corporate careers. How do I take this teaching to the millions, to the billions? How do I take teaching to that place where I can impact more than just the people I interact with on a daily basis? And so came this need to share these teachings, and I said, I didn't start teaching them because I thought, I'm going to get in this infomercial space and I'm going to sell stuff, and teach people. I just started writing a blog. And I allowed people to read that blog, and it was completely free. And I said, just read it. If you want to learn something, you like it, great. If not, then whatever, I was teaching because that's what I understood my benefit for myself to be, So I wanted my impact to be about teaching, and I started teaching business, and I started teaching entrepreneurship. And slowly I realized that people were interested in hearing more, And so as people were interested in hearing more, I started packaging it into ebooks. And as ebooks became bigger, they became books, And I wrote 9 books. I actually wrote a total of 11 books in Radius. My latest one is going to be 12. But, my first 9 books were really my failure as an author. Like, it was more of my learning process because I didn't read books, and to write books, you have to understand how other people write books, like you have to read other people's work. And I didn't like reading, so I was stubborn. I was like, I'm going to write 9 books just to figure out what not to do so I can write an actual really powerful book, And one of the things I realized in my life was that all the stuff I was writing about was powerful, great financial stuff, but it wasn't my work. It was work that I had learned. It was stuff that, like, maybe you experienced at some point, and you're like, hey, this is how you should manage your finances. But what I'm telling you at that point is not something that I've created. It's something I've learned myself from someone else, and I've applied, and as a result of it, I'm sharing it through another book. So the question is, how authentic is that book if it's only reiterating my experience of using someone else's concept? So I decided that maybe my first 9 books, while they were not bestsellers in any means or anything else, perhaps these books were just either a practice for me to learn how to write a book, or B, for me to understand that perhaps the real teaching comes from relevantly ultimately innovating the teaching by taking people to the next level rather than having them focus on something they've read somewhere else. And so came third circle theory. So I created the system that I looked back in my 20 years of life, and I said, my 20 years of business life, and I said, what is it that has enabled me to teach? What is it that has made so many of my employees super rich, or so many of my students and people who have listened to my teachings very successful? What is it that some people get and other people don't? And I was able to trace it back to one key factor: awareness. People that are aware typically learn and consume information better than people who are not aware. And so I came up with this concept, which is my personal belief based on my experience of how awareness is born within people. Something that a lot of people were not talking about, and they were talking about how to make money. They were talking about how to build a business, but they weren't talking about how the human being evolves to being in a position to be prepared to build a business, and why some people get it on first try and others don't. And I linked all of that back to awareness, and I I decided to write Third Circle Theory, which was my bestseller that now crossed over 300,000 copies, being self-published. I think it's one of the best selling self-published books in the world. And as a result of it, leveraged these vehicles like social media and everything to talk about the topics that people were talking about, but putting a spin of awareness on it. It got a really good following. It got a lot of people loving it. And as a result of it, I got into pretty much the book business, even though I didn't want to be in that business. Now I have books and I sell books. And now that people understand that concept, I can share more intricate concepts that I've created around business, having had so many, helping people understand that a lot of these concepts are not found in other books. They're just coming from my experience. But one of the things I pride myself on, my friend, is that a lot of my teachings, I call my latest book the universal language of business, because any industry, anytime, anywhere can pretty much apply the concepts shared in my book Radius at any given time, can leverage it in any country at any point, in any revenue company, can leverage it and grow their company tenfold.
Yep. That's awesome, man. So then, and what I love about you is, like if you go to Barnes and Noble right now, and I know a lot of people aren't buying books at Barnes and Noble and or whatever, going to the store, but if you go there, right now, and you go to the business section, out of the hundreds of books, it's like how many people that have authored these books have actually done it? You know what I mean? I mean, that's what's that's what's so scary out there is people feel like they feel this massive pressure to self-develop, which I get and I'm all about. But I don't feel like a lot of people spend time figuring out, okay, who is the author? And do I want to learn from somebody that's actually done it, or learn from somebody that this is just straight up theory? Like none of your stuff is theory. It's actually shit that you've proven, that you've done, that actually works over and over and over. So tell us a little bit about Radius, man, because I know that's your latest book. What's the overall concept? And then two, I want to make sure that, and we'll have links to all of this, but where's the best place for those that are listening to go get your books, learn more about your books, learn more about you?
Yeah, so I recommend people definitely check out Third Circle first, and you can pick that up anywhere books are sold, Amazon or anywhere else. It's called Third Circle Theory. It can also be bought at thirdcirclebook.com. But Radius is the follow-up sequel to Third Circle, right? So Third Circle was about understanding the mastery of circumstance, the mastery of society, and the mastery of life. Three things that typically nobody talks about, separating society from life, understanding where words like passion and purpose come from. They're so abstract in a lot of talks, but they're real. Like these are real concerns people have. Will I ever fulfill my purpose? Can I ever find my passion and create a business out of it? So all of these things are real things people are talking about, but they're not defining them. And I did that through Third Circle Theory. I think that's what made it popular. Radius, I waited 2 full years for Third Circle to really take shape and people really to adopt its teachings before even starting to write Radius. And then it took me an extra year to write it. And I wanted to create a different book the second time around that would be a follow-up to Third Circle, but that would also focus on the mechanics of business. Some of the things we talked about here in this interview, the 5 pillars of business, how people reach, how can people go from having an entourage to having mass public adoptance of a product? How can people prepare to launch a business instead of looking at a business from a 0 to 100 kind of timeline? What about a negative 100 to 0 timeline? Because the majority of businesses are built in the pre-stage rather than during the stage of launch. So a lot of people aren't looking at these things and they're not talking about them. And so I decided to create a book that would touch or focus on these 5 pillars we talked about in this interview, but that would really break down some of the key concepts of how to understand business. Because I think you said this earlier. You said it's easy to go in a bookstore and look at these people that are teaching you business, right? And the reason that they're teaching you business, even if they've never done it, is because they're perhaps good teachers and the learning makes sense, right? But the lack of experience in doing the work that they're actually teaching leads them to one key failure, which is that they don't understand business. Business is so much more than just selling a product or a service. It's about consumer behavior. It's about understanding the mechanics. It's about processes. So all of these things are things that people who haven't done can still teach, but they're going to have a different output on making people understand it. And one of the key things in my teachings is that I'm very proud of being able to get people to understand how to apply what I'm teaching. And so Radius covers the 5 pillars of business and helps someone at any stage, in any business, to understand how to transition from one to the next and what it takes. And as a result of it, really helps the reader understand why their business is either succeeding or failing. So that if they understand why they're succeeding, they can spend more time doing the right thing. If they understand why they're failing, they can understand what they lacked or what they didn't prepare for that they need to go back and talk about. And it's funny because I've given this book out to maybe 100 people so far to just give me some feedback, let me know how they've done it. And 8 people already quit their businesses. And I love that because I was like, this is the perfect product. It's the business book that makes people quit their business. And people are like, why would you be proud of that? Well, why would you want to run a business that you know is going to fail in a year? Why would you want to continue to go down the wrong path, right? Just because someone on social media told you it was cool to own a business and they portrayed themselves with a Lamborghini and never explained the difference between owning one and getting to one, right? Like there's a completely different thing here. And I wanted a business book that was going to disrupt how people thought about business, but that was also going to help scare people to a huge degree to how fragile their business is, because a lot of people don't realize that they're building businesses that are standing on zero foundation. And tomorrow, when Google changes the algorithm, when Facebook decides to block your ads, your business dies. Like you're done because you never thought about business. You just were selling something. And so I like being able to get people to that stage where I get them scared and uncomfortable, because then I get them to create change. And so it's a book that scared a lot of people, apparently 8 of them, to running away from business. But you know what? I'd rather do that than have a book that you put down and you're like, I never need to pick it up again. I had a guy tell me he's going to read it every 3 months to make sure that he's still on the right path. And I have people today that hold Third Circle Theory in their cars with them like a Bible, which is exactly what I want. I want people to adhere to this idea of being self-sufficient and not relying on others to grow themselves, their business, and everything forward.
Yeah, no, it's amazing, man. Cause it's like, you talk about those 5 pillars. If all of a sudden you get a deep understanding that, hey, these can't be applied, so I can't actually go out there and create. Cause it's, I love the quote of, I don't care how hard you're sprinting. If you're sprinting east, you're never going to see the sunset. Right. So it's like hard work doesn't always pay off. If it's not a great overall strategy to be in, yeah, it's better to be able to dump it and focus your time and energy on something else. That's epic, man. I know that
you said something. You said hard work. I want to touch on that for a second, because a lot of people are like, I'm a hardworking guy and be successful, but that's not true, right? We know a lot of people that work really hard. And there's 2 reasons why that doesn't apply. A, working hard has a different definition for everybody. Some people work very hard. Some people work harder and they think they don't work hard. So everybody has a different definition of what working hard is. Some people align it to how many hours they work in a day, others to how focused they are. It doesn't change. Everybody has a different definition. So it's not a common baseline for what makes a successful business happen. Now, one of the key things with that too is I always tell people who tell me, if I'm hardworking, you'll work. But I tell them, I'm like, do you not think that out of the millions of people who own a business, like a large portion of them that are failing right now are still hardworking? Like, do you think everybody who's failing is just lazy? Of course not. People work hard at what they do. They believe in what they do. They work hard at it. But when they're working hard in the wrong direction, or they're working hard on the wrong things, or they're working hard because they're unaware of what to work on, well, what's the point of working hard? You know what I mean? If you're training and you're like, I'm going to go and be Mr. Olympian, and you're like, okay, great. So go to the gym every day. And you're like, every day I'm working my biceps. And you get there and they tell you, well, this is a competition by your whole body. You didn't work out your legs in 3 years. And you're like, what? Like, nobody told me that, right? Nobody told me the rules of the game. I didn't know. So I was just doing what I thought was right. And I was doing it really well. So that's why I got the biggest biceps here. But it's not a bicep competition, right? That's not what it is. So it's the same thing with business. If you don't understand business, how can you work hard at something you don't understand? So it's the same basic principle that I want people to get out of this, especially if you're watching this. It doesn't matter how hard you work. If you don't know how to work or what your business is, then what difference does it make how hard you work?
Yeah, I love that you brought that up, because it's like this hustle word has become such a fad word, out there. And look, dude, I mean, me personally, I've had to put a lot of hustle into every business I've created. And eventually I've been able to build a system where I don't have to necessarily put that same amount of hustle in there. But it wasn't just the hustle. Like you said, if you don't have your systems processes dialed in, if you're not working smart and working hard at the same time, it just can't exist. So love it, dude. So then, you talked about Secret Entourage Academy, and we'll have links to your books, whether our audience, if you're listening on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, the website, wherever you're at, we will go get those right away and click, and highly recommend that you guys do. But what are some other, there's some other places that our audience can follow you, learn more about you. I know you've got a lot of content out there. What are some of the best places to do that?
Well, I mean, one of the things I always tell people, when you do a lot of things, there's only one central place to go to know more about what I do, and that's on my site, PejmanGhadimi.com. So at least you can click companies and see, what's of interest to you. Not everyone loves the same things, right? But I'm a teacher in all concepts of luxury lifestyle, finance, and business. And I have a platform called Exotic Car Hacks that's actually picked up tremendous heat, where I teach people how to leverage luxury goods like exotic cars as a means of creating assets rather than liabilities. I teach at Watch Conspiracy how to leverage exotic timepieces to create either a flow of revenue or to enjoy some of the nicest timepieces, again, as an asset. And then I also, of course, teach business and entrepreneurship through one of my bigger platforms that is very well known out there called Secret Entourage, which can be found at secretacademics.com, where I recruit new entrepreneurs each month, people who have had tremendous success in what they do, and I help them reach more people by broadening people's awareness of different industries. So I've always thought that the formal education system was fucked, and that, they really had no meaning to paying so much money to go sit through lecture after lecture of shit that's outdated for like 20 years. So I discovered that one of the best ways I think that I've learned from my life, and I never had the opportunity to have a mentor, like someone that spoke to me and said, listen, this is what you got to do, which I think a lot of people confuse coaching and mentorship. Those are two completely different things. But, I never had the opportunity to have a mentor per se, but I had a lot of people that I observed through my life, be really good at what they did. And I learned a lot from that, And one of the things that happened as a result of that was, because I learned a lot through that, I've always thought that when I had enough money, I would create a platform that would allow people to go there and learn how others were successful and what they had done. You keep seeing Lamborghinis, don't you wonder what the guy driving did? But you ask him, he's not going to spend 40 minutes and talk to you about how his business is successful, why it's successful. What happened, though, is that the powerful thing was that if you can go to a place and hear from 300 of the most powerful people on earth in business and have them share with you in an hour at a time what they've done to be successful, how they've done it, then I'm not expecting you to become an expert after. I'm expecting you to trigger something in your mind if you have interest there, to at least take direction and take a step in the right direction. And so that's why I created Secret Entourage Academy. It's been very well received by people for the past 8 years and has grown tremendously to 30,000 plus members worldwide, and continues to be a good alternative to formal education when it comes to business and entrepreneurship.
Yeah, love it, man. So I know you talked about earlier of getting clarity of your vision of where you want to be in the future. Whether that's 5 years, 10 years, where you see yourself. And I mean, you have a lot of experience in business because you got started at a very early age. But overall, dude, when it comes to overall just life, I mean, you're a pretty young dude, right? What, 34 years old or
35?
35,
yeah. 1 year.
Yep. So with that, man, I mean, with all the success that you've had and you continue to create, I mean, where do you see yourself taking all of this?
Well, I mean, I think my impact is only what I created to be, right? And my biggest, I think my biggest work is going to be my books, Third Circle Theory and Radius, and some of the books to follow. I've always been a teacher at heart, so I think that one of the things I've always understood is money is leverage. And as long as I continue to make it without working in it, I can continuously focus on the things I love doing, which is teaching. Regardless that it's teaching over a cup of coffee because someone runs into me at Starbucks and says, hey, I love your car. And they sit down and I have 20 minutes to teach them something. Or that it's through a podcast, right? Having a conversation here, or through bringing people on my show and talking to them, right? Like about how they've been successful. All of these things, I mean, are just different vehicles to teach people. And I've kind of committed that my impact in my lifetime would be to create teaching material that people could use and that people could literally put in place and take action on. And that's what I continuously make my personal brand about. And you'll see a lot of new businesses or new verticals of teaching coming out that are relevant to that. You know? And I think a lot of the future of my life will be focused on that as well.
Yeah, it's so many people that maybe haven't created the financial success that they want in life, and they're just choosing to live amongst mediocrity. They look at uber successful people like you and just think you're greedy, right? Well, every uber successful self-made person that I've ever met, it's not about greed, right? It's they're leading from this internal huge place of contribution or impact. And it's just this common trend that you see, which is so powerful, man. So I love it.
Well, you bring up an interesting point about greed. This is, again, what I talked about in third circle theory. People who believe in greed or say others are greedy are theoretically people who don't understand how society works. I mean, they just don't understand how money works. And that's, again, the lack of understanding creates a place of suffering and a place of insecurity, right? It's easier to critic than to do, right? I mean, that's obvious. It's easier to look at someone and say, oh, they must have come from parents' money. Like, why do people automatically assume that instead of assuming first that someone is self-made? Get it? Like, why is one over the other? Well, partially because if we do say that someone came from a sense of money, it is easier for us to justify why we are not at their level when we compare ourselves. And there comes the biggest issue entrepreneurs face almost every day. And most people who are in a place of, like you said, suffering early on, don't seem to understand is that the world isn't a competition of where you are based on where others are in your age or in your group. The world is about making sure you do the most you can with the time you have. You have to understand that we all have different timelines, right? Not all of us are going to live to 100. Some of us will die in car accidents. Some of us will die at 30 by cancer, right? That's just the reality of life. The longer you focus on how far you are based on your age or your money, the further you go from trying to be as effective as you can be for the time you have, regardless of what that time is. And I think too many people are so focused on that they forget, to work on themselves every day. And also people, I think, always want things, but are never willing to do things for what they need. So in other words, like they're always like, I don't like the car business, right? I told you at the beginning of this, I didn't want to be a car person. Like I didn't want to be a car salesman. I didn't want to be in that industry or anything else. But I did what I needed to do in order to be able to work on the things I want to work on. And I think that's what people forget. They're like, oh, I want to start a company, but I'm not willing to take a job to build some funds. Like, I just want to start a company and I want to get some investor capital. But why don't you go work somewhere for a year? Why don't you accumulate some money in your savings? Like, what's wrong with that? Like, what's wrong with working and making some money and putting it aside, right? Like, and that's the big problem is that we're accustomed because we see so much on social media and we think the world works in just one way, we end up missing the bigger picture that we are in charge of our own lives, that we like it or not, and that we are going to be the byproduct of whatever we create or put out there in terms of energy. So if we don't put out any effort out there in getting and bridging our way to the starting line of what we want our life to look like, then that start never comes. And then we become very bitter, and it's very easy to compare ourselves and say, this guy found massive success. Okay, well, I was willing to sweep the floors at McDonald's, but you wanted your first job to be $15 an hour. That's the difference, right? I didn't care for $15 an hour. I cared for a job because I didn't have a choice. And while you don't have a choice, you believe you have a choice. That's why you choose not to do the easy, the work that's at the bottom, right? Because it's not exciting, it's not cool, and it's not going to get you a Ferrari on social media. But the reality is it is going to get you a Ferrari on social media because doing the work is going to lead you to making money. Making money is going to lead you to having leverage. And at some point or another, you're going to have to figure out where you fit in and what you're not doing and start doing it, even if you don't like it.
Yeah, powerful stuff. Love it, man. So if you could go back, knowing everything that you know right now, if you could go back, whether that's, for you, I guess you started at 14 years old with your entrepreneurship career, but let's just say if you could go back to when you started your sort of really getting into your banking career, like maybe your 18-year-old self, knowing everything that you know now, and you could give yourself 2 pieces of advice that you feel would really catapult your success that much quicker, what would those 2 pieces of advice be?
I'm going to reiterate them because I think we talked about them through this. The first one is, it's not what you do in life, it's how well you do it. If you're a cashier, be the best cashier in the world. If you are a car wash person, be the best car wash person in the world. Don't look at your job as a job. Look at it as what you've committed to do for that moment. And so the commitment you make and how you do it will build the character you build tomorrow when you're building your own company. So regardless of what it is, how you do something holds a lot more weight than what you actually are doing. The second piece of advice would be that, we again talked about this, is your timeline is your timeline. Don't compare your life to anybody else's. Everybody starts with a different circumstance. Everybody has their own path to take. And while many of us may share similarities in our paths or in our direction, none of us share the exact same outcome. And so it is important to not compare ourselves. But again, go back to my first point of focusing on being the best at what we do. And whatever that best is, we can always look back and say, no one could have done it better than I could have done it at that moment. And if we can go to rest with that thought, then we have no regret, right?
Yeah, no, that's so powerful, man. Because it's comparison creates so much internal suffering, and now with social media, man, it's like suicide rates are through the roof since the inception of Facebook, right? And
but it's funny you said that. I was talking to a guy right before this. I was just interviewing him, David Bayer, has this transformation program, really good guy. To try to talk to him on your show. I mean, he'll blow your mind on how he thinks. But we're just talking about that, and I brought up something to him during our interview that he was like, "Yeah, I never thought about it that way." And what that is that social media, right? Like it hasn't helped people. Like what it's done is it's allowed people to experience life through other people's eyes. Like before you were comparing yourself to your neighbors, because we've always wanted to compare ourselves. That's what human beings do, right? Like we look at our neighbor's car, we're like, he's got a nice red car. Damn, I wish I had a red car like that. He's in the same type of work he is. His house is that size, my size. Like that's normal. The problem is that then we were doing it by seeing our neighbors and talking to our friends and meeting new people. Well, that was very limited, right? Now we're doing it by comparing ourselves to an entrepreneur that's in Asia, comparing ourselves to an entrepreneur that's in Mexico, to another guy that's in LA, to our neighbor and that guy. So now our competitive lens just became like 7,000 folds instead of like 2-dimensional with whoever was in front of you, Now it's become everywhere. So the same thing can be said about violence and suicide rates. People may have been killing themselves and we just weren't aware of it. But now we can actually see it, if you know what I mean. Like now we can actually see people dying. We can hear about the struggle and the suffering across the globe. So we're amplifying how bad it is, And a lot of times, people are like, well, let's say the unemployment rate or this is bad. When you really look at the statistics, it's not as bad based on percentages of human beings on the planet. But because we're exposed to it, right? Because we're seeing how people live in a community that doesn't have jobs, we're now seeing the real impact of unemployment. So it's now become a real topic for a lot more people than it was before, right? Because if you lived in a place where unemployment was non-existent, then you never understood why 4% is different than 8%, 8% from 12. It didn't make any difference to you, right? So the awareness level is now emphasized by social media. So I would say social media is nothing more than 8 degrees of awareness, and you have to be very cautious because if you're not able to act on that awareness and you get exposed to so much, it's information overload and it'll kill you.
Yep. True, man. Powerful stuff, dude. All right. So I know that I end every podcast with this, you guys, but information without implementation is truly just the start of delusion. Information is no longer power. It's taking that information, taking action on it that creates power inside your world. So PJ shared so many just amazing pieces of advice with you guys today. Take something that you learned, go out there and implement, execute, take action on it immediately. Also, like I said, I don't care where you're at watching, listening to this podcast. We're going to have links to PJ's books, to his website, to his academy. So you can learn more about PJ, follow PJ. Make sure that you do that right away. And PJ, man, this has been an epic time. This has been a huge honor, dude. I know how busy of a man you are. And this has been amazing having you on the show, my friend.
Well, I'm really happy that I was able to hopefully leave an impact on your audience, and happy to communicate with any of them as they feel the need.
Yep, absolutely. All right. Thanks again, you guys, and we will see you next time.